Right. Hey, folks, it's Faz here from Fazlifts. Today, I'm looking at a review of long-term weight loss maintenance. So, a bit of a new feature for this channel in that I'm going to be covering a review, which is of a meta-analysis, and the meta-analysis is called Successful Weight Loss Maintenance, a Systematic Review of Weight Control Registries. Basically, this study took around about, I think 90 it was studies, and collated all the evidence and looked at all the patterns of people in the study who maintained their weight loss for a long time. So like upwards of 5 years, 10 years, stuff like that. So the idea is, let's see what we can learn from people who maintain their weight loss for a long period of time. All right. So that's what I want to talk through today. So in doing that, I'm going to share with you my screen and we're going to talk you through the main points. So let's begin. All right. Okay, so firstly, if you just skip ahead to these useful tables, essentially this looks at how many articles were from each country. So the majority were from the US. There's a handful from Portugal, Germany, Finland, and Greece as well. In terms of the gender, it was probably mostly female, like 3/4 to 2/3 female. In terms of age group, you're looking at mostly between 40 to 50, generally educated, generally employed. Marital status was about half and half. Weight history, there were lifetime average weight of about 103 kilos, which is fairly substantial for a female. And then we have a look here, weight at baseline, 71 kilos, BMI at baseline, 25 kilos, weight loss at baseline, 32 kilos. And that's pretty spectacular. So you're looking at, an average weight loss there of about 32 kilos, which is what, 66, 70 pounds. Pretty substantial weight loss. So this is robust weight loss data. So we're looking at people who have lost a lot of weight and what that tells us. All right, now this just looks at specifically what the studies were, nothing particularly important there, just to say that people were like over 18 and they'd maintained a weight loss of something like 30 pounds for over a year. So yeah, robust, impressive weight loss. All right, now we get into the juicy part. So this is the part where we look at what were the trends, what were the commonalities with people who had long-term weight loss. So far what we've done is we've established the fact that we're only looking at people who have had robust weight loss and have maintained that weight loss for a number of years. Now, let's look at the commonalities. Okay, so what were these people doing? And this is kind of split up into two columns here. One is on weight loss strategies and the other one is on weight loss maintenance strategies. For the most part, they correlate together fairly well. So firstly, big one was increased vegetable consumption. That was huge across the board. Next was regular breakfast intake. Now, weirdly enough, regular breakfast intake was slightly lower in weight loss than it was for weight loss maintenance. So skipping breakfast doesn't really seem to be a long-term tactic for a lot of people. Might be useful for people just initially losing weight, but probably not such a long-term strategy. And I tend to find that's true. I don't make a habit of skipping breakfast. When I do, it's more like by accident, and I do it more when I'm dieting. So that makes sense to me. Then we had some like silly stuff here, like regular soup intake was not really that much of a correlation between long-term weight loss. Increased protein-rich foods. I found this one quite interesting. There wasn't really a massively high correlation with increased protein-rich foods. So it was like 36% for weight loss strategies and about 43% for weight loss maintenance. So it's not a massively high correlation there. However, increased fiber-rich foods was huge. So this at least appears to be saying that vegetable intake was probably more correlative of long-term weight loss maintenance and weight loss, initial weight loss, than higher protein, which I find interesting. And it probably correlates with the research that Menno pointed out recently, where Menno Henselmans, where he looked at what was more satiating, was it protein or fiber? We know that protein and fiber in combination is very satiating, but he was pointing to the fact that fiber is probably more satiating. So that probably makes a bit more sense. However, we've not really looked, this only says looking at protein-rich foods. It doesn't say looking at protein-rich foods alongside vegetable consumption. It just looks at it in isolation. So you could have a situation where you were smashing a lot of protein, but not very many vegetables, and that probably wouldn't be an ideal situation either. So perhaps the combination is good. We don't know. This doesn't really comment on that. But either way, increased vegetable consumption seemed to be huge. And I would say with the overwhelming amount of research on protein and satiety, it's probably a safe bet that you could carry on with the protein intake, high protein intake. Now, the next thing, energy compensation. Physical activity and exercise seem to be a big thing in getting the weight off initially, but it seemed to lose effect in weight loss maintenance. So it does seem from this that in terms of weight loss maintenance, the diet, focusing on that is the key part rather than the actual exercise, whereas the initial burst of weight loss, probably your exercise is going to help that. There were a bunch of other stuff here, like using stairs rather than elevators, walking instead of driving, taking public transport, and parking away from your destination, all those things which don't really make a massive impact. If you're wondering why this was included in the meta-analysis, it's simply because there was a study which tested it. So that's what the one means next to the activity there. The one means that there was a study. Now, goal setting seemed to be a relatively large part, at least in the initial loss. Now, this was quite interesting, I thought. Following a diet program was a very, very low incidence of success. So if you look at some of the things like Joe Wicks's success rate for his program, it's something like 5% out of 100%. So he's got, obviously out of 100%, he's something like 5%. So he's got like a 95% failure rate on his diet programs, because it's essentially, look, following this from a famous person, which is not particularly well thought out, just follow the weight loss plan. It's one of the reasons why I don't really like meal plans per se. Like if I'm starting someone off with a meal plan, I'll generally try and push them towards creating their own meal plan very, very soon. So they have that education, they have the ability to do things for themselves. Just following someone else's program really doesn't allow for a great deal of success by the looks of it. And that was done in 2 studies rather than just 1. Now, this one I think is super important, information seeking. So conscious food selection, as in reading labels, that was high on both weight loss and also weight loss maintenance. So that I think is super important. And that is more what I do. It's more the education of fat loss, the education of diet, rather than just that temporary, here's a meal plan. It's actually teaching somebody how to make their own meal plans, teaching somebody how to structure their own diets and what's important on the day-to-day basis. Education is far more valuable. And on a side note, I also think that's why the online coaching model works a lot better than the PTs who are there once a week for an hour in your week. And then that's all it, just to basically make you sweat. People, the weird thing is, just to go off on a bit of a side note about that, weird thing is people think they're getting a lot for their money when they hire a one-to-one PT, but the reality is they're not. It's just, it provides them with that temporary motivation for an hour, when what they really need is they really need to spend a lot more time actually digging deeper into the education. And that's where a good online coach helps, because they can really clarify that information and descend it down into something which is manageable and to consume. All right, so if we keep going on, planning content. Healthy foods available at home, as in fruits and vegetables, was a massively high factor in weight loss success and maintenance success. So that was really important. Having healthy choices at home readily available is super important. So if you open up the fridge and you've got nothing but chocolate and stuff, that's going to be a bad time. We want to make sure we've got more than that. All right, and then regulation restrictions for following fad diets was not so good. Decreasing alcohol intake wasn't so correlative. Decreasing intake of soft drinks even was not so correlative either, but we don't know if those were sugar-laden soft drinks or not. This one, which is saying reducing portion sizes, seemed to be fairly correlative. Limiting intake of certain types of foods was highly correlative. I find that quite interesting, because you guys have heard me go on and on about sort of clean eating fads and how there's a certain sort of subsect in the community, in the fitness-based, evidence-based community, of people who say that if you eliminate certain foods, then you're going to develop an eating disorder, or you're going to rebound and binge and all that kind of stuff. Well, the reality is that doesn't seem to be the case. And again, going back to the research from Menno Henselmans, we know from sort of psychological research in the area rather than fitness research that one of the best ways to get rid of a craving is to actually starve the craving. So where if you limit certain types of foods, that would probably suggest that that's a better strategy than just giving yourself a little bit of what you fancy. And I personally prefer the strategy of just starving and craving. I try not to give in to any kind of like temptations. I'm still fighting that inner fat kid, and most days I win. So yeah, it does seem to point to this idea that being free and easy and just like, hey, eat what you like, give yourself a little bit of what you fancy, the nice but dim strategy that a lot of influencers seem to adopt to appease their audience and to lie to them to say you can have everything and still be lean, is probably not that accurate. So there we go, another little tangent there. Some other things: reducing sugary foods, reducing fatty foods, and reducing fat in meals, confection, seasoning were all highly correlative. Regular meal frequency was very highly correlative, so that makes sense. Basically having a set meal structure, regardless of what that meal structure is. I mean, we saw earlier that having a breakfast is generally a good idea. So yeah, regular meal frequency seems to be highly correlative towards weight loss maintenance. So I imagine that's probably, if you have a set meal structure, you're more than likely preempting your hunger on a day-to-day basis. I know with some of my clients, if they skip breakfast or whatever, they just get ravenously hungry. I've said before that the common day of an office worker is breakfast is fresh air and coffee and good intentions, followed by a lunchtime trip to Greg's for a pastry and a chocolate bar. And that's not a great start to the day. And you're just going to get hungrier and hungrier as the day goes on until the inevitable binge at night. So yeah, regular meals where you've actually prepped those meals in advance, having a decent breakfast, lunch, dinner, all that kind of stuff, seems to preempt a lot of hunger issues. And hunger is the main thing. If you can control that, you're good to go. Just as we go down, things that were correlative, I found this one quite interesting. Counting calories and counting fat was actually not that correlative. If you put that to what I was saying previously, before, as I mentioned, was limiting food types. Limiting food types and limiting food, things like limiting sugar, limiting fat, limiting your food quantities, limiting your triggers, for example, all that seems to be highly correlative to success, whereas counting calories doesn't. And I think you've got to bear in mind something that I preach on to my clients nowadays is I try and move people away from the counting calories model, not because it doesn't work, it works very well, but it's not a great long-term strategy. So counting calories for the rest of your life, every day, every meal, is a very, very arduous task and always puts you in that mindset of, I'm restricted. So counting calories doesn't seem to be highly correlative. And generally, what I like to do is I like to move most of my clients away from a calorie counting model by the time they finish with me, so that when they do leave, they are left with a more sustainable method. And for some of my clients, I'm actually starting now with not counting calories and just doing things via a food rule-based system. All right, so if we look at self-weighing, that seemed to be highly correlative, which I agree with. It matches my experience. This idea that you should monitor yourself somehow. So monitoring could be weighing yourself in the morning, it could be measuring yourself, it could be taking pictures, but for the most part, it's quick and convenient to just step on the scale in the morning and go from there. And if we look down at what else is correlative, support from family seems to be pretty correlative to long-term weight loss success. And that was about it. I mean, meal substitutions, weight loss medication, hypnosis didn't seem to be very correlative at all. Surgery was not correlative whatsoever. And weight loss supplements, again, not correlative whatsoever to long-term success. All right. So, right, folks. So I've given the sort of rough outline there of what was correlative for long-term weight loss success and what wasn't. I think overall, we can say that a lot of the principles that I preach on this channel do work. And you'll find that most people who work with a lot of people who have been in the industry for a while will tend to have similar views on things, even though initially their views might appear to be different. But when you break them down, they're quite similar. So some of the big trends are education over temporary motivation. All right, it's vital, and this is where a good online coach comes into play. Plug down below, description, get in touch. A good online coach comes into play because they can help to educate you, and that is a far greater source of long-term success than just merely high five motivation from your local airhead PT who wants to make you sweat for an hour. So long-term education on all aspects of your program, whether it's diet, training, cardio, lifestyle, all that kind of stuff, is far more valuable. You get a lot more for your money with an online coach, in my opinion, a good one. So there's that. Next thing is, in terms of actual food intake, you want to keep those vegetable intakes high. I personally find that's one of the things which is a major source of frustration for people coming through my doors. They say they are quote unquote picky eaters. Basically, what they mean by saying they're picky eaters is they never like to eat vegetables. Essentially, what it is. And that seems to be highly correlated to weight gain, because if you're not eating filling vegetables, what are you going to fill your plate with? And it's going to be a lot of other stuff. So vegetables, a lot of fiber, highly correlated to nice full stomachs when you're eating food, and they seem to be a great long-term weight strategy. Plus, they're delicious. Come on, let's celebrate some vegetables. Protein intake was a bit more variable, but I will say that was probably because it may have looked at protein intake in isolation. And if protein intake can be quite high in a lot of fast foods as well. So maybe that's one of the things where there's a bit of variance, and protein matched with fiber is probably a little bit better. But you know, the data are what the data are. And if it's saying that protein isn't highly correlative, then perhaps we should place more focus on vegetables. Also, alongside that, I would say structured meals is very important. So make sure you are preempting hunger every day. Okay, so what that means is, unless you're specifically trying to fast and you're having a shortened eating window, preempt your hunger. So if you're too busy in the morning, for example, make sure your breakfast is meal prepped the night before. You have a decent breakfast. Preferably that breakfast is a high protein, high vegetable affair, which is going to help to calm that appetite down so that you're going into lunch and dinner much more stable. All these things are good for long-term success. Right, folks, I'm going to call it there. So if you like my content, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, share this around. That'd be really useful. And if you look in the description below, you'll see a Google Drive form, a link to be able to ask me a question or to work with me. But hopefully that has given you some more information on what is really good for long-term weight success as defined by thousands of people and almost 100 studies over the span of like 2 decades. It's a fantastic study. That's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. All right, folks, thank you. Take care.